And so, Annie, in all of this time I've had dog sitting you, I've had one question. Can dogs be twins? I will take that as a yes. Okay. Hello, I'm Bob the Booker, and I'm here today with Annie. This is my last little day with her. She's having a fun time. My last day with her before I sort of stop dog sitting for the moment. And as you can see, she is, I mean, nothing's changed. But Annie and I will. Okay, there we go. Now, I did a tag recently called the end of year tag, and in doing so, and as I was sort of trying to talk about it at the beginning, I managed to completely fluff up the words, and for some reason called it the end of days tag, or was at least about to. A couple of people in the comments said, you should create that, and here is the fruits of that labour. I've currently got Annie jumping up on my leg, so really, I mean, this is the end of my days dog sitting her, which is the only kind of parallel I can find right now with this video. But I thought it'd be quite fun to explore various ideas of what it could be to talk about the end of days. And so the first prompt I thought of for end of days was this idea of prophecy. And so I was really excited by the idea of what kinds of books out there talk about prophecies, have kind of really interesting prophecies that either come to pass or don't come to pass in the book. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. A book that I can think of that has some kind of prophecy come up, and I mean, in some ways it's less a prophecy and more a promise. And as you may be able to tell, this is Damon Galgutt's The Promise, where there is this sort of idea from the beginning of the kind of, maybe I'm sort of twisting it a little bit with this idea of prophecy, but this idea that this piece of land will be passed on to this woman. And throughout the sort of course of the book, we're meant to see how it does and does not come to pass. And I mean, I think it's a fantastic book anyway, but I really thought that this central premise, there's Annie, I really thought that the central premise of having sort of a promise and this sort of idea, will it be kept, will this sort of thing come to pass, is a particularly big part of the book, and particularly this kind of almost prophecy as well of what this is meant to be for South Africa. That South Africa is meant to be having a moment of being extremely, it's meant to be kind of coming together in unity, and it never quite happens. Next up, dystopia. End of days normally also kind of creates this idea of some kind of apocalypse or dystopia. And for this prompt, I'd really like sort of suggestions on books that deal with the end of the world in some form. And there are two that I really want to talk about for this as well. So The High House by Jesse Greengrass and Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, both of which deal with environmental collapse and as a result this sort of dystopian world of what it looks like when resources are scarce, or when there's a sort of breakdown in sort of other parts of the world, and what that then kind of does to this idea of sort of civilization or whatever it is, you know, how people stay together when resources are scarce and when everything else happens. So in Jesse Greengrass's The High House, I thought this book did this really cleverly in terms of capturing this sort of town slowly turning a little bit in on itself, and things that were once secure and seemed permanent start to really unravel. Isn't that right, Annie? Yeah? No? Okay, cool. Had a great time there. And same with Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. It kind of looks at this from a slightly different angle, but this idea that there is this sort of, as things sort of start collapsing, we also watch as sort of group dynamics turn and people sort of strongly grow to distrust each other. Next up, End of Days can also take us to the winter. And so I'd really like, for this prompt, you to think about a book that is sort of set in a very kind of wintry or kind of cold time. It could be that it has winter in the title, but it could just be that the themes of the book are particularly about that. Ali Smith's Winter seems like a very obvious choice in many, many ways, given the title and given everything about it. But I also think that there are some really clever books that deal with this idea of cold, the kind of lock people in. For example, a book that I want to use for this is Lean Full Stand by John McGregor. And this book didn't always work for me, but a large part of it focuses on the kind of Arctic, sort of an Arctic explorer, or set of them, and the sort of trauma and knock-on effects from being out there and from witnessing people dying or being close to death and all of those sorts of things. And I think what is really great about this book is how it captures the sheer isolation of that cold and of that loneliness. that I think is not explicitly winter, but I think does some really clever things in terms of really showing that kind of desolation of a landscape. Next up, perhaps taking End of Days very literally, nighttime. So this is a prompt of books that are all about the night or set in the nighttime. And I think this is also really fun just because when books kind of take some of that away, it can be really powerful. You know, I think as humans, we naturally are a little bit more scared of the dark than we would be the day, just because it's unknown, it's mysterious. We're meant to kind of have our guard up in some way. And so I'd really like for you to sort of think of books that are set around the night or focus a lot on nighttime. The book I want to use for this is a book that this book sort of deals a lot with dark and light, but in a really interesting way because it's in some kind of labyrinth. And this is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And I think what's really clever about this book is the way it plays with these ideas of sort of light and daylight and sort of not really knowing how the hours of the day are passing. And so I think something that I just really enjoyed about Piranesi is having these moments where he walks into these rooms that are only sort of lit by things like torches, or where sometimes he can trace where you are in the day by some of these other things. So I think this book really plays with that idea of nighttime really, really cleverly. And I really appreciate books like that as well. And another book that I kind of want to throw into the mix on this as well is Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation, because the character spends so much of her time asleep or kind of zonked out on various sort of sleeping medication that her whole concept of day and night and what, you know, days going into weeks, going into months is so warped that I think this book just as a result plays on that really cleverly of what actually, you know, not really understanding nighttime from daytime in a way that I just thought was so clever. And for the next two prompts, I want to think about end of days in what might sound like a morbid sense in terms of the end of our own days. So the first of these two prompts is elderly. So books that deal with older characters or feature older characters or aging really prominently. And again, I mean, I often talk about this book, but I love it so much, which is why I always talk about it. 5-Year Sentence by Bernice Rubens. And this book really cleverly details a woman at the, well, I mean, she's an older woman, just retired from work, and she is basically, when we meet her at the beginning of the book, she is wanting to take her own life because she sees nothing else to live for. And what this book does really cleverly is examine things from within her perspective of watching her slowly go down this route of a story that is so twisted and dark and still kind of absurdly funny, but very, very dark in the process. I really enjoyed this book, and I think it deals so well with this idea of getting to a certain point in life and kind of wondering what the point is, and it's handled so cleverly. And the second one for this is end of your days, in a sense of what do you think is a book that in many years' time you will still be thinking about, that you'll still be thinking about and sort of still feel incredibly passionate about. And this is sort of prompted as well, thank you for this, by the way, from a commenter who mentioned this as a sort of potential prompt when people are talking about it. And I really love this idea of thinking about what are books that in many years' time you really still will care about. For me, there are quite a few books that I think still mean so much, and I think will probably reveal different details as I go through my life. So even though it's a sort of young adult book, Momo by Ende is a book that deals a lot with time and stories and the idea of slowing down or speeding up or anything like that. And so I think this is a book that will kind of keep revealing new layers as I go through life, and I think as a result it's already been a book that I sort of check in with every couple of years. But I also think that there are some books where perhaps when I read them the first time I was fairly young and sort of will still get more as I go. And I think, again, it's a book I talk about a lot, but Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf is a book that I've read it, I think, 3 times now, and I find new things each time. And I hope and think it's going to be a book that in many years' time I will still be thinking about and will still care about deeply, and will hopefully find some new richness in it about kind of what it has to say about life, and all of those sorts of things. And the final prompt I want to use for this is a bit of a silly one, but is at the end of the day. And this is a trope or cliche that drives you mad. And this is partly because of the idea that I know for many people, not necessarily myself, although I did once have a youth worker who said at the end of the day, literally all the time. But what is a sort of, a phrase like at the end of the day can really drive some people up the wall for its kind of cliched thing. And actually that same youth worker I mentioned who said at the end of the day, at one point there was a very confusing sentence as a result, because he sort of said, at the end of the day, we'll meet up at this place. And we had to clarify with him, like, so sorry, are you just saying, at the end of the day, ultimately, in conclusion, we'll meet here? Or are you saying that we will meet at that place as the day is ending? Because those are two very different things, and we need to clarify that. But this is a sort of a trope or a cliche that drives you mad in books. And there are two sort of main ones that come up for me. One, I don't know if it's a trope more as a sort of style of writing, but I get really irritated by authors really trying to write dialect into characters, but by just giving them irregular spellings and not changing anything else about how things are written. So, as in, just sort of this really like cod, hackneyed kind of phrasing, particularly when it comes to like Cockney accents or whatever, or like Northern English accents, where characters suddenly sort of like, ooh, hey up, I am doing this. And you're like, okay, great, but somehow this feels really inauthentic and really weirdly like sandwiched in. And I don't like the way it's been done. I think Shuggy Bain does it very well, and it feels very authentic. But I've definitely seen it in other books where that absolutely drives me mad. I think the other thing, and I can sometimes overlook this in books, but a cliche or sort of trope that does really annoy me sometimes is where there's just this sort of complete, like, just completely by coincidence, all of these things are happening. And I get, to write a plot, sometimes you want that to happen, but I've definitely read a few books where it's sort of just been like, and he magically happens to be in this right place at this right time. You're like, okay, come on now. Like, this is ridiculous. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So that has been me and the little Annie here doing this end of days tag. And this is my last day, as I mentioned, dog sitting little Annie. And I'll hopefully be back with her again soon. But expect that, so this will be the last sort of Annie video for a little bit, but then there will hopefully be a few more soon. Annie and I are just going to have a couple of little bit more cuddling, and sort of just, I'm going to go and take her for a little walk before it's sort of time for me to head away for a bit. But while I'm doing that, I'd love to tag a few people, there you go Annie, I'd love to tag a few people who I'd like to try out this this tag of mine. And so firstly I'd like to tag AJ Dunn Reads and Writes. They again are really clever, have really interesting books and sort of takes on books, and I'd really love to hear them. Larry over at Larry Has Opinions, again brilliant, and always a good choice for a tag really. And also Jen over at Jennifer Loves Books, who I think could be really fun. And actually another Jen, let's do it. And Jen the Librarian, who I think would also have some great thoughts on this. And why not a final one? Let's have Sandy over at Misreads a Lot, and Sina over at Beating Around the Books. Let's do that. I've been Bob. Please, by all means, if you want to tag yourself in it as well, I'm not fussy, go for it. I've been Bob, the Booker, doing my own little tag for some reason, and I hope you're doing really well. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.